We've already learned about engine fires in flight. Now let's cover some other possible sources of fire. First, let's talk about a fire when you're starting the engine. The most likely reason for a fire when you're starting the engine is that you ran the electric fuel pump too long and put too much fuel into the engine. So the first bold-faced memory item is cranking, continue to get a start, which would suck the flames and accumulated fuel into the engine. Now, as it states here, if you can get the engine started, the flames will be sucked into the engine where they're supposed to be. All right, next, if the engine starts, you put the power to 1700 RPMs for a few minutes. This is to make sure that the flames have been drawn into the engine. Then you shut down the engine and inspect for damage. You wouldn't want to just go fly because the fire may have damaged something important. Now, if the engine doesn't start, there are additional bold-faced memory items for you to check. First, throttle, full open. This allows the most amount of air to be sucked into the engine. Mixture, idle cutoff. This is to cut off the fuel to the fire. Cranking, continue. Try to continue to draw the fire into the engine. Fuel shutoff valve. Select the off position, which is to pull it fully out. And the auxiliary fuel pump, set that to off. These items are also to cut off fuel to the fire. If there's time, grab the fire extinguisher, which just happens to be the next item on our list. And if you don't have one, have a ground attendant obtain one for you. Next is the engine. Secure the engine by turning the master switch off and the ignition switch off, and then release the parking brake. And this is so you'll be able to push the plane away from other planes or buildings, and then you want to evacuate the airplane. That's important. You're the pilot. Get out. The fire. Extinguish it using the fire extinguisher, wool blanket, or dirt. And this is another great incentive to evacuate from earlier. Get out of the airplane and stop the fire as best you can. And lastly, the fire damage. Inspect and repair any damaged components or wiring before conducting another flight. If you mentally review this checklist every now and then, you'll be prepared in case there's a fire. Now, another possible source of fire in flight is an electrical problem. How would you know it's an electrical fire and not some other kind? Well, electrical fires have a characteristic acrid odor that comes from burning insulation. So let's take a look at the electrical fire in-flight checklist. The first memory item is master switch off. Now, when you do this, you're cutting off the electricity to the fire source. And this will also be shutting off the radios and the intercom, so you won't be able to talk to any controller or your passengers. The next item is vents, cabin air, and heat closed. This is to prevent the fanning of the flames by the air coming into the cockpit. And the last bold-faced memory item is fire extinguisher, activate if available. Now, presumably you have extinguished the fire. So now you can complete the rest of the checklist to improve the situation. And the first step is avionics power switch off. The other switches, except the ignition switch, off. With these steps, you're setting up to try to isolate the fire source. Now, there is a warning in your information manual that states, after discharging the fire extinguisher and ascertaining that the fire has been extinguished, ventilate the cabin. And here's how you're going to ventilate the cabin. Remember that vent cabin air heat? Well, we're going to open that now. Now, if the fire is out and you don't need to talk to anyone on the radios, then leave everything off and set yourself up for landing at the nearest suitable airport. However, if electrical power is necessary to reach the nearest suitable airport or landing area, you will need to continue with the checklist. The next item is master switch on. Now remember, you turned everything off using their own switches, so not much is going to come on yet. But this is what you need to do first so that you can turn on only what you need. Next is circuit breakers. Check for faulty circuit, Do not reset. So look at the circuit breakers. If there is one or more popped, that may give you an indication of where the fire might have started. And since there was a fire, you would not want to reset the circuit breaker. Radio switches off. You should have turned them off before, but check them again to make sure they are all really off. What you'll do in a minute is turn them back on, one at a time, to try to locate the problem. Avionics power switch, on. Radio electrical switches, on, one at a time, with a delay after each until you find the short circuit. And if you smell burning when you turn something on, turn it back off again. If it's a radio, use the other radio. You should turn on only the radios that you need to get to the nearest suitable airport. And again, be ready to turn the switch off if the smoke or fire returns. Again, although fires are very rare, they can be serious. But if you stay calm and follow the checklist, you can handle them like a real pro.